The storm came in hard from the north, dragging a wall of fog with it so thick that even the cliffside houses disappeared under its weight. People living along Greywater Point were used to storms, but no one expected the lighthouse to come alive again. It had been dead for nearly 4 decades. Staircase rotted, wiring stripped, and windows blackened by salt and time. The government declared it unsafe, and the town called it cursed. The last keeper, Elias Rohan, vanished during a nighttime shift without leaving so much as a bootprint behind. On the night the light returned, 3 fishermen were out on the water, just beyond the shoals. They saw the beam cutting through the fog-wide, powerful, rhythmic haze. If someone inside was turning the giant lamp manually, but there was no lamp anymore. Just broken glass and rust. Yet the light moved exactly the way it had in the old days, sweeping from the north to the east in slow, deliberate arcs. One of the fishermen, Idris, recognized the pattern. His face drained of color as he whispered, "That's Rowan's code he used to signal boats on storm nights." The others stared at him, but Idris refused to say more. 3 hours later, Detective Mason Halley arrived at Greywater Point, headlights slicing through the fog. He wasn't interested in legends or ghost stories. His job was to deal with trespassers, vandals, or more commonly drunk teenagers with too much free time. But when he reached the coastal lookout, he noticed something unsettling. The lighthouse beam wasn't steady. It was pulsing. Morse code. And not random. A distress call. Mason stepped out of the car and listened. The foghorn from the pier moaned in the distance, mixing with crashing waves below. He tightened his coat and walked toward the fencing that blocked off the lighthouse path. Emery Cole, his partner, arrived moments later. "You seen this?" she asked. "The whole town called it in," Mason said. "That's not battery-powered equipment. That beam is too strong." "Kids," Emery guessed. "Kids don't know Morse code from the 1960s. They ascended the narrow trail toward the tower. The fog thinned just enough to reveal the silhouette, tall, skeletal, windows like black eyes staring outward. The beam flickered again, pulsing 3 long flashes. 3 short, 3 long SOS. The same code Elias Rohan used on the night he vanished. Inside, the smell of rust and old seawater clung to the air. Mason swept his flashlight across the entryway. Dust, pebbles, spider webs. Nothing disturbed. But as they climbed the spiral staircase, they noticed something both bizarre and unmistakable. Footprints. Fresh ones. Barely an hour old. 2 sets, 1 adult, 1 child. Emery slowed her pace. "This better not be what I think it is." They followed the prints to the lantern room at the top. The old Fresnel lens was missing, but someone had lined the metal frame with strips of reflective foil. In the center, a portable industrial floodlight hold battered sat on a tripod, wired to a car battery, and it was cycling through Morse code automatically, controlled by a small analog timer. Someone set this up intentionally. Someone who wanted the signal to be seen. But the strange part wasn't the machinery. It was the smell-burnt metal, like copper overloading. Mason touched the floodlight casing. Warm. Recently used. Emery leaned closer to the glass. Why here? Why now? Why mimic Rowan's distress call? Mason didn't answer, because his eyes were on the floor. The small footprints circled the entire room in erratic loops, not playful, not curious, more like pacing. Agitated. And on the window, a small handprint smeared across the glass. "Looks like a kid was really here," Mason muttered, "or someone wants us to think so." Before they could investigate further, Mason's phone buzzed. "Unknown number, locale, prefix," he answered. "Halley." Static. Then a faint voice, not quite whispering, not quite breathing. "You shouldn't be here." The line cut. Mason lowered the phone slowly. That voice, it sounded like Rohan. "Impossible," Emery said, but she didn't sound convinced. They returned to the ground floor. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the cliffside path. As Mason scanned the surroundings, something moved near the rock, small, quick, hunched, low. He aimed his flashlight. Nothing. The cliffside wind howled and carried something else, a faint tapping sound. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. Coming from somewhere below. Emery swallowed hard. The maintenance tunnel? Only way someone gets under the lighthouse, Mason said. The narrow door at the base of the cliff should have been sealed decades ago, but now its padlock lay broken on the rocks. They entered cautiously. Guns drawn, the tunnel was damp and cold, carved into jagged stone. Old pipes ran along the walls. Water dripped from the low ceiling in steady beats. Halfway in, Mason found a tiny red jacket, child size, torn at the sleeve. "I've seen this before," he whispered. "That missing kid case," Emery said. 3 years ago. Lila Dorsey." Mason nodded grimly. The jacket was too dry to have been down here long. Someone planted it, or someone recently brought Lila here. The tunnel widened into a circular maintenance chamber. Rusted equipment. Old fuel drums. Tools scattered. Maps pinned to walls. Some recent. Some decades old, and on the far wall, something that shouldn't exist. A freshly recorded timeline. Pieces of notebook paper taped together, filled with dates, scribbles, names including Lila's, and at the bottom, a crude drawing of the lighthouse, with arrows pointing toward the sea, labeled "Where They Return." Emery stepped back. "They? Who's they?" Before Mason could answer, footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. A silhouette appeared, lean, soaked, breathless. Hona. Rowan. The missing keeper's grandson. "You both need to leave," Jonah said. "You don't understand what this place is anymore." Mason steadied his gun, but didn't aim. "Why are you here, Jonah?" "I came to stop the signals," he said. "But someone keeps turning them back on." "You mean someone else is inside the lighthouse?" Emery asked. Jonah shook his head slowly. "Not inside." Beneath, the chamber went dead silent. Mason moved closer. "Jonah, what do you know?" Jonah pointed at the maps. "My grandfather didn't vanish. He went looking for something he heard in these tunnels. Voices. Signals. He thought smugglers were using the cliffs. But when he got too close, he disappeared." "You think someone killed him?" Emery asked. "I think he found someone who was living under the lighthouse. Using it. Hiding in it. Someone who never left." Mason exchanged a look with Emery. Jonah continued, voice shaking. 3 months ago, I started getting calls from the lighthouse number. Same distress code my grandfather used. Someone wanted me back here. Someone who knows my family's patterns, and yours." Mason froze. "What do you mean mine?" Jonah reached into his bag and handed him an envelope. Inside was a single photo, grainy, old, taken from a distance. A man walking toward the lighthouse in the 1980s. A man who looked exactly like Mason. "You were here as a child," Jonah said. "You might not remember, but you were, and whoever is behind this remembers you." Before Mason could react, the tapping came again. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps, much louder this time, coming from deep within the rock beneath their feet. Emery backed away. "Someone is down there," Jonah whispered. "Not someone. 2. I've heard them," the child's voice and the man's. "Lila?" Mason asked. "And someone using my grandfather's voice," Jonah said. The floor vibrated, just a tremor at first. Then a long metallic screech echoed through the chamber, like rusted metal tearing open after decades of pressure. The lights from Jonah's lantern flickered. A narrow passageway at the far end of the chamber began to glow faintly. Not electric light, some softer, like reflected moonlight on water. "Stay behind me," Mason said, as he stepped toward the passage. The air grew colder. The smell of seawater intensified. The tapping became louder, faster, almost frantic. Emery whispered, "Mason, something's moving in there." He stepped closer. At the end of the passage, a small figure stood motionless, barefoot, hair matted, clothes soaked in seawater. A child, facing the wall. Mason's heart pounded. Lila. The child didn't move. He inched forward. careful not to startle her. When he was only a few feet away, she finally turned her head slightly nod, fully turning, just enough to show part of her face, her expression blank, eyes unfocused. But she wasn't looking at Mason. She was looking past him, at what stood behind him. Mason spun around. A tall figure emerged from the fog filling the tunnel, shoulders slouched, head tilted, its outline vaguely human, but wrong-broken posture, uneven steps, as though its limbs bent in ways a person's couldn't. It moved closer, dragging something hard against the stone with loud, scraping sounds. Emery raised her gun. "Stop right there." The figure didn't stop. It stepped into the faint lantern light, an old keeper's coat, waterlogged, heavy, streaked with salt, the face hidden in shadow. Jonah choked. No, that's not him. That's not my grandfather." The figure's head twitched violently. Then a voice, deep distorted, rumbled through the tunnel. "You returned." Mason fired a warning shot into the ground. The figure didn't flinch. It stepped forward again, lifting an arm slowly. In its hand, something metallic dangled, a lighthouse key, rusted but still intact, the same model used in the 1980s. Jonah whispered that key was buried with him. Lila suddenly screamed, not words, just a raw, primal sound. The figure reacted instantly, snapping its head toward her. Mason lunged forward, grabbing Lila and pulling her behind him. The figure let out a guttural sound. Dengard, frustrated. The lantern light flickered violently. The walls seemed to shake. Emery shouted, "Run!" They sprinted down the tunnel, Lila clinging to Mason. Jonah ran ahead, guiding them. Behind them, the scraping sound grew faster, more aggressive, echoing like metal claws raking against stone. They burst into the main chamber. Mason shoved Lila into Emery's arms and turned back toward the tunnel entrance. Darkness swallowed the end of the passage. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then a voice whispered from the tunnel, closer than before. "You shouldn't have come back." Mason backed away, heart racing. The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the chamber for 3 long seconds, enough for breathing, movement, shifting stone, and something brushing past Mason's shoulder. Then Jonah's lantern flickered back on. The passage was empty, but something had been carved into the wall during the blackout. A single. "Don't let the light die." Emery's voice shook. "What does that mean?" Jonah stared at the words. "It means whatever's down here isn't trying to signal for help." Mason steadied his breath. "Then what is it signaling for?" Jonah looked at Lila, trembling in Emery's arms. "For us." They exited the tunnel fast, sealing the door behind them with a broken metal beam. Lila wouldn't speak, only pointed repeatedly at the lighthouse lantern room, mouthing a single word she couldn't form aloud. Up. Mason carried her toward the tower. Jonah followed, clutching the envelope tight. The higher they climbed, the colder the air became, as though the lighthouse itself was draining warmth from the When they reached the lantern room, Lila pushed free of Mason's arms and ran to the window, slamming her small hands on the glass. "No," Jonah whispered. "No, please don't turn it on again." But something outside the cliffside was moving in the fog, something large, shifting, reflecting light in unnatural ways, as if mirrors or metal plates were embedded into its form. Emery stepped beside Mason. "Is that?" The fog parted, and Mason finally understood. Someone wasn't haunting the lighthouse. Someone was using it. A network of reflectors, hidden across the cliffs, caught the faint moonlight and bounced it into a specific pattern. A signal, a message, a map, a guide. Not to warn ships. To guide someone inland. Jonah whispered, "My grandfather tried to stop them 40 years ago. That's why he disappeared." Emery backed away from the window. "Who is them?" Lila tugged Mason's sleeve and pointed again at the shifting fog. A figure emerged. Not the distorted man from the tunnel. Not a ghost, a living person. Hooded, holding a reflective panel, adjusting it slowly, carefully, deliberately. Behind him, more figures moved in the fog, carrying equipment, mirrors, cables, a whole operation. A whole network hiding beneath the lighthouse legend. Not supernatural. Human. One figure looked up directly toward the lantern room and smiled. Jonah's voice cracked. They've been here for decades. Smugglers, traffickers. Using the lighthouse shutdown to build a whole underground route. My grandfather found their tunnels, and they made sure he never left. Mason breathed sharply, and now they're expanding their signal system. The Morse code wasn't a distress call. Emery finished the thought. It was a command. A figure below signaled with a mirror. The floodlight timer clicked on. The lighthouse beam swept across the coast again. 3 long flashes. 3 short. 3 long. Not SOS, but a different code entirely. One Mason recognized from a smuggling case years ago. Route open. Move now. Jonah grabbed Mason's arm. We need to shut the light down. The hooded figures below began climbing the cliff path. Fast, too fast. Mason turned toward the floodlight controls, but the distorted figure from the tunnel stepped into the lantern room doorway, blocking their escape. It wasn't supernatural. It was a man broken by years of living underground, starved, crooked, limping, wearing the old keeper's coat he stole after killing Elias Rohan. His voice was ruined by damp tunnels and smoke inhalation. He whispered the same words again, finally clear. You shouldn't have come back. He lunged. The lantern shattered. The floodlight burst. The room plunged into darkness, and the screams echoed through Greywater Point long after the lighthouse beam died forever.